Oda created monsters before the world was ready for them. Enel commanded lightning with terrifying precision. Crocodile buried Luffy alive twice. Magellan's poison nearly ended the entire Impel Down escape before it started. These weren't warm-up bosses. They were endgame threats dropped into a story where Haki wasn't even fully defined yet. And Oda knows it. He's admitted in interviews and SBS columns that introducing them so early was a miscalculation. Not because they were badly designed, but because beating them before the time skip made them look weaker than they actually are. Crocodile fought Whitebeard and survived. Enel would have had a 500 million bounty if he'd ever left Skypiea. Magellan one-shot nearly everyone in Impel Down, including Luffy, and only lost because of Ivankov's hormones and desperation plays. These villains weren't defeated because Luffy was stronger. They were defeated because the story needed them gone before readers realized how broken they actually were. Now, as the final saga brings old faces back into the spotlight, fans are starting to understand what Oda was holding back. Crocodile's leading Cross Guild alongside Mihawk. Enel's moon adventure set up something massive. Magellan's poison abilities would wreck most post-time skip pirates if he ever stepped outside Impel Down again. The power ceiling has shifted, and these early arc villains suddenly look like they belong at the top of it, but that's just the start. Here's how it all unravels. Pre-time skip One Piece operated under different rules. Haki existed in concept, but it wasn't the defining combat mechanic it became later. Luffy won fights through creativity, luck, and exploiting specific weaknesses rather than raw power. That worked narratively, but it created a problem. Villains who should have been untouchable got beaten by a protagonist who wasn't remotely ready for the new world yet. Enel is the clearest example. His Goro Goro no Mi gave him control over lightning, one of the most destructive natural forces in existence. His mantra, what we later learned was advanced observation haki, let him predict attacks before they happened. He wiped out entire armies casually. The only reason Luffy won was Rubber's natural immunity to electricity. It was a hard counter written into the fruit itself, not a reflection of Luffy's actual strength. Oda later confirmed Enel would have dominated the Blue Sea with a bounty comparable to top commanders. And his cover story on the moon hinted at technology and power far beyond what Skypiea showed. Enel wasn't weak, he just faced the one person in the world who could ignore his strongest weapon. Crocodile's case is worse because he actually beat Luffy. Twice, he impaled him, buried him alive. Only Nico Robin's intervention kept Luffy from dying in the sand. When Luffy finally won, it required water to bypass Crocodile's Logia defense, and a desperate final clash that pushed both fighters to their limits. But because it happened in Alabasta, early in the Grand Line, before Haki was properly introduced, Crocodile's reputation took a hit. Marineford revealed he'd fought Whitebeard in the past. His presence at the war showed he could hang with top-tier fighters. Now he's running Cross Guild with Mihawk, putting bounties on Marines. Crocodile wasn't a stepping stone. He was a warlord who got unlucky meeting Luffy before either of them understood what they were truly capable of. Magellan is the most terrifying what-if. His Doku Doku no Mi is a one-hit kill ability against anyone without poison resistance or advanced healing. He destroyed Luffy so thoroughly in their first encounter that Ivankov had to pump him full of adrenaline hormones just to keep him alive. Magellan held off Blackbeard's entire crew. He maintained order in the world's most dangerous prison through sheer overwhelming power. The only reason Luffy survived Impel Down was external help and desperation tactics that barely worked. If Magellan showed up in the New World today, most commanders and even some Yonko crew members would struggle against poison that melts flesh on contact. The pattern is clear. Oda introduced these villains when the story was still establishing its power system, and Luffy beat them through circumstances that wouldn't work later. Now the story's evolved, Haki is standard, and these early villains look like they were always stronger than their defeats suggested. The pre-Haki era fundamentally warped how we judge these villains. Armament Haki, advanced observation, conqueror's coding, none of that existed as defined combat mechanics during Alabasta or Skypiea. Fights were won through creativity and exploiting devil fruit matchups. That made for great storytelling but terrible power scaling. Enel's observation Haki was so advanced he could hear conversations across an entire island, yet Luffy's immunity to electricity made that irrelevant. Crocodile's Logia intangibility should have been unbeatable, but water negated it before Luffy even knew what Haki was. These weren't fair fights measured by strength. They were puzzles with specific solutions. Fast forward to post-time skip, and those solutions don't exist anymore. Luffy's rubber body still counters electricity, but Enel's speed, range, and devastating attack power would force Luffy to use advanced Haki just to survive. Crocodile's desert abilities combined with armament Haki would make him a nightmare opponent for most commanders. Magellan's poison would ignore Logia intangibility and require either regeneration abilities or overwhelming speed to avoid. These villains didn't get weaker. The power system evolved around them, and suddenly their early defeats look like flukes rather than legitimate losses. Crocodile's Cross Guild role proves Oda isn't done with him, teaming him with Mihawk, one of the strongest swordsmen alive, and making them the leaders of an organization that hunts Marines, elevates Crocodile back to top-tier relevance. His Alabasta loss becomes an origin story, not a conclusion. He learned from that defeat, grew stronger, and now operates on a level that matches his original portrayal as a warlord who fought Whitebeard. The narrative has corrected his early downfall by repositioning him where he always belonged, among the world's most dangerous players. Enel's moon cover story is the setup everyone's waiting to pay off. He didn't just survive Skypia, he went to the moon, discovered ancient technology, and commanded an army of automata. Oda doesn't waste cover stories. Enel's return is inevitable, and when it happens, he'll come back with everything he learned up there. Lightning powers enhanced by ancient weapons technology, observation haki refined over years, and a god complex that never broke. The theory that he'll play a role in the final saga's great cleansing makes perfect sense. A character who sees himself as divine wielding the power to destroy islands in single strikes is exactly the kind of threat the endgame needs. Magellan's poison abilities remaining unmatched in the post-time skip era is a quiet terror. We've seen Yonko commanders, we've seen admirals, but nobody has shown a defensive ability that completely negates poison on contact. Even characters with regeneration would struggle if Magellan's toxins spread faster than they can heal. His absence from the main story isn't because he's irrelevant, it's because he's too dangerous to deploy casually. If Oda brings him back during a prison break arc or as part of a world government final defense, he'll instantly become one of the most feared obstacles in the series. The larger implication is that Oda's been playing the long game with these villains. Their early defeats weren't mistakes, they were setups. By introducing them before the power system was fully realized, he created a roster of characters who can be reintroduced later with their full potential unleashed. Crocodile isn't the same fighter Luffy beat in Alabasta. Enel isn't the same god Luffy punched out of the sky. Magellan isn't just the warden who lost control of Impel Down. They've all had years to grow, and the story's returning to them at exactly the right moment. If Enel comes back with moon-level technology during the final saga, if Crocodile's Cross Guild forces a three-way war between pirates, marines, and revolutionary army, if Magellan becomes the final obstacle before reaching Imu, then Oda's regret about introducing them early transforms into the greatest long-term payoff in shonen history. These weren't villains who peaked too soon. They were threats introduced before the world understood how terrifying they actually were.